Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with a very special guest from New York City, Linda Stasi, and she's the author of several books, including the Book of Judas and the Sixth Station, and also a daily news columnist. So welcome, Linda. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to finally meet. We've been exchanging emails for so long. First, I want to talk about your books a little later on. But first, I'd like to ask you about your Italian roots, where they come from. Have you gone back and visited and things like that?
Well, my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side were from Sicily, and my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side were from Calabria. So, they say hard heads and violence. So I always say, my joke is, don't piss me off because I'll kill you and I'll still be mad.
Well, my wife is her mom is from Sicily and her dad is from Puerto Rico. So
same.
So now, we've talked a little bit before. You have gone back, and have you gone back to the ancestral towns and everything?
Oh yeah, yeah. The interesting one was we went to Belvedere di Spinello in Calabria, and I went with my husband. Wasn't my husband then, and my daughter, and she's fluent in Italian, and I'm shamefully not. We got to this town, and there's all these people dressed in black, and they're walking very slowly to a church. And Sid said, "That's it, my husband." He said, "That's it. They're all vampires. We're leaving here. This is." It turns out somebody had died. We came in the middle of a funeral, and we stayed with my family, and that I had never known even existed. But we get to the house, and it looks all broken down on the outside. And we go inside, and it was like a palace. Apparently, they tax you on the outside of your house there. So nobody does anything nice on the outside. The inside was like, I walked into one bathroom and it was like Madonna couldn't have a bathroom this big. It was just fantastic. And here's the funny thing. So we went, they fed us like crazy. And then we went to each relative's house, they're all right next door to each other. But for some reason, they put us in the car. We drive 10 feet and get out, go to that relative. They feed us. We go to the next one. So I met my little Aunt Rosa, who made me look tall. I made the mistake when she asked me who this man was. I made the mistake of saying my fiance instead of my husband.
Oh.
So the next morning, I'm at my cousin's house. I hear knock on the door at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And they had a double door. I opened the top. I don't see anybody. I closed it, went back, and I hear knock, knock, knock. And then I opened it again and looked down. It was Aunt Rosa. She came to check where I was sleeping and whether I had been sleeping with this man. I never even met the woman before.
Oh, that's hysterical.
Yeah,
That's so funny. And, women in black, all dressed in black, doesn't faze us Italian Americans because we're used to that.
But no, this was men in black, women in black, children in black, dogs in black. And they were all marching very slowly. It was very scary.
So when you went there, did they know that they had American relatives?
Yes, they knew we were coming. We managed to connect, and they knew we were coming.
Yeah, and everybody tells me the same thing, that they just really open up their homes and their arms, and they love finding out about us. Like I told you earlier, I was supposed to meet like 23rd and 4th cousins that I never knew existed up until a few years ago, they were, from what I gathered, they were just excited as I was to know that they had an American cousin, as I was to find out that I actually had, Italian cousins, especially from my dad's mom, because I had no idea that they were there.
And it was funny because the next morning there was one house we didn't get to. So we get in the car and we drive 60 feet to this house. And this woman answers the door, and we're talking, and she speaks Italian, and English. And it turns out her brother was a NASA scientist, this little tiny town.
Really?
And this man came in, and she was holding a baby. And a man came in with a like a doctor's kit, and I said, "Oh, is the baby sick?" And she said, "No." I said, "Oh," she said, "No, he's trying to sell me pharmaceuticals." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I'm the doctor." It was all so surprising to me that this little town had produced a NASA scientist, a female doctor, all kinds of other really, really accomplished, interesting people living in this little mountain town. It was great. My Sicily experience, going to see that wasn't as productive. We took an Italian friend with us. The first time, every door slammed in our face because I hadn't been able to reach anybody. And the second time, we took my friend Mario, who lives in Italy, and he would knock on the police office door and say, "Their family's from here. It's okay." And then everybody opened up their doors. It was really funny.
That is funny. I had a funny experience in Sorrento, because we were walking through the town, and I saw a butcher shop, Sorrentino. So I was just outside taking a picture just to show everybody at home, hey, there's a Sorrentino butcher shop. And the butcher came out, and I don't speak any Italian, unfortunately. I wish I did, but um, I got the drift of, he was asking me who I was and where, why I was taking a picture. So I took out my license, and I said, Sorrentino, America. And he got all excited, Ashbad, Ashbad. And he just ran away into the building next door, the store next door. Came out with somebody who spoke English. And he wanted to know all about me and where I was from and where the family was from, and all of that. Um, and the other fun experience that I had in Sorrento was I don't know if you've ever been there, but there was right in the middle of town, there's the
Yes,
Circolo Sorrentino.
right.
And I wanted to go inside and have my photo taken inside, have my wife take a picture inside. And it was an early Sunday morning, and the maitre d' or the waiter said, "You can't go in." And I said, I just want to take a picture inside. My name's Sorrentino. I just want to get a picture. He says, "No, you can't go in." So after a couple of minutes of this, he went like this. And there were the four guys with the cigars and the fedoras sitting in the corner. And I said, okay, I understand now.
So does Sorrentino means that you're from Sorrento, little Sorrento?
Initially, yeah, that's what I suspect. I haven't been able to trace any Sorrentinos back to Sorrento, but that's pretty much what everybody says. My third great grandparents, Sorrentino, lived in Nocera Superiore, in Campania, not far from Naples. So that's as far back as I've been able to go with the Sorrentinos, back to there. I think my great grandfather became a lawyer because his wife's parents were lawyers. Well, his wife's father was a lawyer. And I haven't been able to confirm this yet. I'm trying. Supposedly, from an obituary I found from the 1920s in New Jersey, I found out that he was a Supreme Court justice in Naples. And I found this from, like I said, from a New Jersey newspaper.
Right.
So strange how that stuff, all kind of falls together. So you sent me a photo that I thought was amazing. Charlie Carlino. Who was Charlie Carlino?
So I'm researching a book now because my mother and her sisters and brothers grew up on a ranch in Colorado, which I thought was really weird and interesting considering they're first generation Americans and their parents are from Sicily. Well, it turns out that this town in Colorado where my grandfather had the ranch, Pueblo, almost all the boys from their town ended up living there, moving to Pueblo, Colorado. So at one point in their town in Italy, there was almost 85% of all men under 40 had left and moved to Pueblo. So I found that all very interesting because I'm doing this book, as I said, because my mother and her sisters, there were 8 of them. They rode their horses to school. They were wild women. They got in trouble all the time. And my uncles used to ride in the rodeo. And that was a picture I had and my mother had told me about the flood and all this other stuff. So I just thought that my mother and her sisters would make a great story. And my grandfather on my mother's side was a very abusive man. And he used to smack my mother around, or tried to. My mother's tougher than me. And he used to call her Ruby because she wore red lipstick, and he'd catch her wearing red lipstick. So the name of the book is Ruby's Lips. So as I start investigating my family, and I'm connecting with a lot of relatives I didn't know I had, including the Carlino family. And turns out my cousin, Charlie Carlino, is a restaurateur in San Jose, California. And he wrote a book about the Carlinos. In the book, he says, well, your cousin gave me a picture. I said, which cousin? He said, your cousin Karen. I said, I've asked Karen for pictures. She said she didn't have any. So he sent me the picture of Uncle Charlie Carlino, who looks like the missing person from the Village People with his giant chaps on and everything, and a cowboy hat. Well, it turns out Uncle Charlie Carlino was married to my Aunt Carrie. It was her first husband. I don't know. They must have married her off when she was 14 or something. And when their baby was 10 days old, he was killed in the longest shootout in Colorado history. Wow. So that's my uncle. So, and if you ever wonder, this is what I've discovered while researching the book. You ever wonder why Italians were always depicted in all the movies as the bootlegging gangsters of the 20s? And this is the reason. It started in Pueblo. When all these guys came to Pueblo, first they came from as miners, and then because for Italians, any bit of land is king. I mean, so they all started farming, and they were raising, what was it called? I forgot the fruit they were raising. They weren't getting a lot of money from this. So Colorado was the first state in the Union to go dry. So they started fermenting this fruit that they were growing and making hooch. And that's how it started. So by the time the rest of the country went dry, these Italians in Colorado had 4 years on winemaking and liquor making on the rest of the country. So they had the monopoly. So that's how it happened. Believe it or not.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
Isn't that an amazing story?
That's so funny. That's so funny.
That's how it happened.
And it makes sense that they went there for mining. I'm sure they probably were sending people over to Italy to find Italian men to come over and work in the mines. And
I think it's sort of like, in New York City, there's ethnic groups come over, and then sort of like the Indians became the ones who owned all the gas stations, and the Chinese became all the ones who owned the laundries, and the Italians became the ones who owned the delis, and ethnic groups do this. They send for their relatives. And that's what happened in Pueblo. And it was Pueblo and Trinidad. And it was mining country, but then it became farm country, and then it became hooch country.
Yeah. And,
amazing, right?
Yeah.
So that's how Uncle Charlie Carlino, the missing Village People guy, ended up in the shootout. It was over, it was part of the liquor wars.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and even within the Italians, I know that the Bades, my grandfather, right, they were all icemen. For some strange reason, the Bades had the ice industry, So
my family had the hooch industry.
Well, that was probably a little bit more lucrative than
right. Yeah, I think it was very lucrative. And my grandfather had this ranch. I didn't think that he was involved in bootlegging because he had a cattle ranch, and my uncles used to ride the what do you call it when they go cross country, the cattle drives. Then I found out, so I'm looking, and I find out, he was a rancher, he was a miner, he was an entrepreneur, and yes, he was an assassin. There's a record of him being an assassin, an FBI record, but they never got him on it.
Wow, that's an incredible story. So how did you? I'm assuming your mom at some point came to New York, yeah?
Yes, here was the story. The story always was that one of my aunts got married and moved to New York. And when she became pregnant, she was having a baby, that she called for her mother because she was afraid of having a baby by herself because she was so young. And that my grandfather said, no, you're not going by yourself because then you'll be a putana and you must Now, the whole family must come. And that's the story we always heard, that he was protecting my grandmother's honor, sold the ranch and came. Well, I find out from another distant cousin, no, 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 he lost in a poker hand. So this book is getting more interesting by the minute.
Oh yeah, that's super interesting. I'm not an author by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm trying to put together a book uh, specifically about all the Italian families, but geared a lot towards my grandmother's nobility side, and I'm just finding out some of the craziest things about some of these people. Going back that my ninth great grandfather virtually owned the Campania in the 1600s. And then, who's stabbing who's poisoning who's
Right.
sleeping with this one, whose daughter's getting married at 14.
We have all these whitewashed versions of
Yes,
our
yes.
families, particularly if your family was nobility. You think, well, they just stood around and ate grapes and had parties, and but
No, apparently,
everybody was always poisoning everybody and stabbing
yeah.
everybody in the old days.
And when they weren't doing that, they were fighting some war
Right.
someplace over some hillside in Italy. So I want to ask you, as you know, my dad was a daily news photographer for 42
Right.
years.
That's
My
incredible.
my cousin Paul was about 10 years after my dad was a photographer for, I think up until probably around the mid 90s or something like that. So how did you get started with the Daily News?
Well, I was working as a columnist for New York Newsday, and I got recruited to the Daily News in the mid 90s. I think it was something.
Yeah, so you probably just missed my cousin.
Yeah,
Because that's probably around just around when he retired. He may have been a little bit later than that. I mean, I think he's 83.
we probably knew each other, but in those
Probably,
days, the newsroom had like 250 people. Now there's
yeah,
not even a newsroom anymore.
I know. It's so sad. I used
It
to
went down
love,
to like 40 people, and then they just shut up the newsroom and said, everybody just file from home. That's just not what I want to do. I have no, I mean, I write when I want to for them, but I don't want to be, I love the atmosphere and the 24/7 adrenaline rush of the news and being in the newsroom. And now everything is, rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. That's not what I mean, the kids who are coming up in the news business don't even know how to do a stakeout anymore because they don't have to,
yeah,
because they're just rewriting somebody else. And that to me is not fun. That's not fun. That's just
yeah.
grind. That's just
And,
grind work.
and I used to love going to the Daily News building with
I
my
was so
father
excited.
in the
So excited.
50s, the late 50s, early 60s. And to your point, going into that, I've been in that newsroom. And
Right.
this is when
Yeah,
there was smoke filled and the
right.
typewriters were going,
Right.
and my I call him Uncle Phil. He was actually my dad's cousin's husband. He was a photo editor at the Daily News.
Really.
So we
That was like the most important job. It was New York's picture newspaper. That was the
yeah
most important
yeah
job, was
and
getting those pictures, not going to some service and picking up pictures. Everybody was out in the street, to getting those pictures. It was going
yeah
to crime scenes. It was doing all that stuff. Those guys were heroes.
and my dad, several times they wanted to make him a boss, and he didn't want it. He wanted to be on the street taking the
Right.
taking the pictures.
Yeah, because if you're the boss, you're not in the action.
Yeah.
You're just yelling at everybody for not being in the action enough.
And one of my dad's, and you may have even seen it. One of my dad's most famous pictures, I think, of his, and he's had pretty much everything: plane crashes, Tony the Fruit Man hanging out of the car, and all of that stuff. But there was in 1956, a father kidnapped the baby, and my dad got the call. He was working Brooklyn, I think, at the time, and he took a picture of the mom, very distraught and all of that. And the father was so moved by the photo in the Daily News that he called the paper and said, "I'm going to bring the baby back,
Oh
but
my. Wow.
only if the photographer who took the picture of my wife is there to take the picture with the baby.
Oh my God! Wow.
So at
You
the
have the photo?
time, the news, the Times, the Journal American, they all shared an office, and they were all right next door to each other, and they would all they'd all wind up going to these photo shoots at the same time and everything. Well, my dad had to sneak out because he couldn't tell them where he was going because
Right.
this man wanted this
Right.
exclusive. And they were all asking him where you going and everything. And I don't know what story he made up, but he made up some kind of story and got this shot. But, we were, growing up, my brother and my sister and I, we were kind of like minor celebrities every time Dad had the front page or the centerfold. And like you said, those pictures were made by New Yorkers in New
Right.
York.
Right.
And it's not the same anymore, like you said.
No, I mean, everybody uses photo services. The Daily News, I don't know how many photographers they still have on staff, and I think they're probably freelance. I mean, there was a time when there were like 50, 60
That's
more photographers. There were 250 people in the newsroom.
And my dad, not to take anything away from photographers today, and I'm a lousy photographer, but my dad was walking around with a speed graphic with
Yeah,
two
sure.
plates and flash bulbs, and the shots that these guys would get. I mean, you look back at those photos, nothing compares to those black and white photos from back
No,
then.
the Daily News halls in whatever office we were in, and there were 3 offices. The first was in the great Daily News building. Then there was one on 34th and 10th. And now the last one was way down by Wall Street. Every one of those offices had the halls lined with photos from the very beginning to now. And some of them were just astounding. Most of them were just astounding.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And for a while, after the war, because all the photographers were coming back from World War II, my dad he actually wanted to be a combat photographer in World War II. And they told him, you can't go right into being a combat photographer because only real photographers,
Right.
he wasn't at that time, can do that. But they said, we'll put you in the Signal Corps. We'll go through the photography and all of that. And the life expectancy for a combat photographer was 6 months.
Oh my.
So they said, you'll
Really?
get your chance. But then they found out he had a punctured eardrum.
Oh, that was that.
And he got kicked out of the Army for that. And so then he got into the Daily News because there were no photographers. So he was able to take pictures. But when they came back, then he was WPIX doing newsreels for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or something like that. And actually, you'll find this amazing. My wife and I, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, we were watching the Hilton story on TV. And I think it was the 3rd or 4th episode, they showed Nikki Hilton marrying Elizabeth Taylor. And they're on the boat and they pan the dock, and there's my dad square in the middle with the movie camera. And it was just like this. And I said to my wife, that was my father. And she said, no, I can't. How do you know that? I said, I'm telling you, I know my dad. That was him standing there. And so I found it on YouTube, and sure enough, there he was with the trench coat, the typical newsreel guy from back then.
I have an really interesting, bizarre photo story like that as well. When I was at the New York Post, I wrote a column on 9/12, the day, it ran 9/12, and I wrote it on 9/11. And the photo that accompanied it, which they had no clue about, was my cousin, Frank Candiano, who was the lieutenant colonel who led all the troops into 9/11, into Ground Zero. And the photo that accompanied my column was my cousin leading the troops into Ground Zero. Isn't that wild?
Wow. Sometimes you say it's a coincidence, but then you say, maybe it's not. I mean, I find some things sometimes when I'm doing research that, you're looking and looking and looking and waiting, and then all of a sudden something happens and out of the blue. And, several people had told me that And I kind of believe it. You know, these ancestors want us to find them. So
Yes.
sometimes things, gets planted. So I want to talk, a little bit about your books for sure. I know you have a couple of fiction books. I believe they're fiction, Book of Judas and Sixth
Yes, they're
Station. Yeah.
novels, yes.
What are the books about and where can people find them? And
Okay, the first one, The Sixth Station. Well, I write my novels the way because I'm a journalist. I mean, I spend years not just researching, but going to every place. So my husband and I because we're insane, we took a 1,400-mile road trip through Turkey. And one of the places we visited was the house of Mary. Now, I had no idea that the Virgin Mary lived in Turkey, but apparently, when Jesus was on the cross, he said to John, his one of his apostles, "She is your mother too. Please take care of her." So John took her to Turkey, where he thought she'd be safe. And there's this little house that was excavated about 100 years ago, maybe. And the walls are this thick. And the little peasant houses in Turkey back then, and 2,000 years ago, the walls, they don't exist anymore. But it was built like a little fort. And I started having visions after that about writing about a book. And then I realized that I had this idea from there that if they found the DNA of Jesus and they cloned Jesus, would the same thing happen again? Now, I am not religious by any means, but this book was fed to me, there's no doubt, and required me 5 years through 6 countries. I traveled with an exorcist priest from the Vatican, and we took a road trip through Italy until I found the Veil of Veronica, the so-called Veil of Veronica, and it has, which is in a little monastery, just sitting there, and they let me take photos of it. And as I took photos of it, it kept changing and changing and changing. And the 84-year-old exorcist priest that I was with, I said, "Father Jake, look at this." And I showed him how the pictures kept changing. And some of the pictures, the veil has got teeth and is growling, and others he's smiling. I said, "Look at this." And boom, he faints dead away on the altar. And I think,
wow,
oh God, now I'm going to have Weekend at Bernie's. I got an 84-year-old stiff. I got to drive back to Rome. But the monks who said, "Oh, no, he's fine." I said, "He's laying there." They said, no, he's fine. And they carried him to a cell and they let him sleep it off. And they said, "Let's go out to dinner." We went out to dinner and when we came back, I opened the door. He's still there. As I said, "You sure he's not dead?" They said, no, he's fine. And the next morning he woke up and he said he was just overcome by the energy. And that was it. And he was fine. And I stayed with the monks. I stayed with a crazy cloistered nun who studies this veil all the time. She's cloistered up in a mountain by herself. And she hadn't talked in 20 years. And she was given permission to talk to me. And then I had to she was hanging on my car. I had to keep hitting the door to get her off the car so I could get away. I was escorted through France by a motorcycle gang when I got lost. And I climbed the mountain twice just to write that first book.
Wow, that's incredible. And that's an amazing story about that. So how did you find this exorcist priest?
My husband knew him, believe it or not, from New York. He's a real character. He owned a restaurant in New York, and then he was sent to the Vatican. I don't know. It's all very mysterious. One time we went to Italy, and we always thought he was kind of just a pathological liar. And he said, "Come on, I'll take you to the Vatican to see the Pope's place." And well, yeah. And we pull up, and the what do they call the guards and the Vatican
The
guards?
Swiss guards, yeah.
Yeah, they open the doors and we go in, and I'm taking pictures on the Pope's helicopter pad at his desk and all kinds of stuff. It was so crazy. So when I decided I had to find this veil and I found out where it was, I called him up and I said, "Hey, Father Jake, you want to take a road trip with me?" So we road tripped through about 200 miles there and back, stopping at crazy places and having him almost die on me. But, unlike a lot of novelists who can make up stories and do their research without going, I need to go to these places. I need to smell what it smells like. I need to know. And every time I go, I have another adventure that I would never have dreamed of that fits in the book. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I was so,
I'm stumped on this last book because I haven't been able to travel to Colorado. But now that I'm vaccinated, as soon as people are out and about, I'm going to Colorado to visit the place and see what's what, because I don't want to go there and not be able to talk to anybody. With
yeah. Yeah.
COVID, I just don't want to. So as soon as that's all open up, that's my next trip.
And that's why I was so disappointed that we didn't get to go last year, because that was part of my plan too, is actually going to some of these places and seeing some of these places. And
You have to see them for yourself
yeah.
because there's nothing that a photo is ever going to tell you.
Yeah, well, one of my great
different
grandfathers is actually buried in St. Peter's.
What?
Pope Paul III. Pope Paul III is one of my great grandfathers, believe it or
No,
not. Yes.
no.
I'll send you the link so you can see
Wow.
my chart. Yeah, I just found these crazy things.
Well,
And
I did the genealogy thing, and on was it not 23andMe, and I shared the DNA with Marie Antoinette.
there you go.
We have the family DNA, but who that? Yeah, I get to be with like the meanest woman that ever lived.
Well, you know, the
most spoiled anyway.
The funny thing about this is there's millions of people who are related to these people. The trick is being able to find the connection.
Right.
And I was lucky that my grandmother brought, I call it his calling card. It's about the size of an index card. And it says on there, his name, Nicola Piomalo. And in Italian, of course, it says from the Dukes of Capricoda. And my mom would always tell me that, her father, my grandmother's father was a duke or a count or something like that. And I kind of expected to maybe find a little something there. But like I said before, it was his wife that had this amazing connection that has brought me back to 750 AD throughout all of Europe and all of that stuff. And
so she was permitted to marry someone who wasn't of royal blood?
Yes, probably because, by that time there was no real nobility anymore, and they probably had to marry off. But I'll tell you an interesting story about that. My grandfather was in a seminary. I had always heard the story that he would tell everybody that my grandmother would walk past, and my grandmother was very, very beautiful, walk past and flirt with him, walk past the window and flirt with him. I found out later from one of my second cousins that the real story was she was driving past the seminary in a fancy carriage one day and it broke down. I guess a wheel fell off, who knows? And he helped repair the carriage and they gave him a ride to wherever he was going to go. And that was it. He left the seminary. I also think that maybe part of the reason why they came to America also.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they had several children there, but my gut feel is that she probably wasn't in the best graces of the entire family, because her grandfather was Prince Luigi Caracciolo, so he was a big deal, and I'm sure her marrying somebody that was not
Very
from
interesting story.
nobility probably didn't sit very well.
About their meeting, there's probably somewhere between the two stories is the actual story.
Yeah, probably, like everything else.
Maybe she arranged for the wheel to fall off because she was flirting with this guy. Who knows? But that's what I have discovered as a journalist. Somewhere between the person who calls you up with the tip and the truth is the real story. I used to tell any reporter who ever came to work for me, don't come to me with the tip. Really, because the tip is like the tip of an iceberg. It's like this. It's all shiny up here, but the dirt is underneath. It's been there for thousands of years. Dig that up and then tell me what the story is.
Yeah, right. And the interesting thing about my grandmother's parents is that they were Piomalo and Caracciolo. His uncle and her aunt were married. So you know, you start running these things through your head and you say,
Yeah.
well, what probably happened was they were probably, and they were a little bit older. They were probably in their 40s when they got married.
Really?
And you say, you know what? Maybe my great grandparents, maybe were at the wedding, they were at a party, they met, because that's very unusual to have, you know, two people marry, you know, this person's niece and this person's nephew got married, you know, just like that. So you start thinking about those things. So I want to ask you one more thing that I think is fascinating. You're involved with the Scotto cookbooks, yes?
Scotto, yes.
Scotto,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I wrote their cookbooks. They're friends. They've been my friends forever, so they were very reluctant to ask, but they like the, you know, they. So I said, absolutely. What, are you kidding? I didn't write the recipes, but I wrote their family stories. And interestingly enough, I started adding my own family stories in there, and to see if they'd notice, and they didn't, because their family stories are the same as my family stories. Waking up on Sunday morning and you smelling the sauce being made and the meatballs frying, and everything was was exactly the same.
Yeah, no, we all have that dipping. Well, getting the meatball before it was in the sauce, of course, grabbing that.
Now, see, I never liked that.
Oh, I love
Yeah,
those.
I never liked it. My brother liked that. That was not for me. I had to have it cooked in the sauce before I would steal one. No. I didn't like it just fried.
But yeah, absolutely. All those. Yeah, we all have that same memory. I used to love.
And then you make an extra one for the dog.
Yeah, yeah. My grandmother's dog used to eat the pasta.
Yeah,
Um,
too.
and you know, I used to love bringing the non-Italian friend over uh, to grandma's once in a while, and because they had no clue, you know,
Yeah.
they didn't know about this. You start at 1 and finish at 6.
They thought that the first thing that came out was the meal.
That was the meal.
No. You know, my mother used to have when I was growing up, a big Lazy Susan on the dining room table, and it was always filled with candy and nuts and pretzels and chips. And since it was always there and we weren't forbidden, my brother and I really just ignored it all the time. My friends used to pile into my house and run like their pants were on fire to get to the Lazy Susan because their parents didn't allow them to have all this stuff.
That's funny. And we used to go to the beach with sausage and peppers, eggplant parmesan, and you look at the blanket next to you, and you know, the American kids would be eating their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
I remember one time we had a family picnic at Bethpage State Park, and I remember the whole family came, but my mother always just called it macaroni and meatballs. So my Uncle Tom Renda made the pasta, and my aunt said, "Come on, time for pasta." And I was like a little kid, and I started crying. I said, "I thought we were having macaroni." I didn't
That's right.
it was called pasta. We used to call it macaroni.
Macaroni, of course. Yeah, no, it's only it's what the last 20 years you call it pasta. You go to the restaurant, pasta.
It's
It's
like,
always
what's that?
macaroni. Did you have gravy or sauce?
Gravy.
Yes, that's
Gravy.
of course the gravy meat.
Sunday gravy.
And where did you go?
I found out the difference. It's called gravy because there's meat in it.
That's right. Yeah.
It's called sauce if there's not meat in it. But now we call everything sauce.
Now
But
everything
my mother
has to
used
be
to
sauce.
throw in the braciole and the meatballs and whatever, all that stuff.
And where did you grow up?
In Hicksville, Long Island.
Oh, so you started in Long Island.
Yeah. Well, I was
Wow.
born in Brooklyn, and we moved to Hicksville when I was like 2.
Yeah. I mean, we're all from Corona originally, and then my parents when they
Lemon
first,
ice, king of Corona, the greatest
yes,
lemon ice in the world. And Parkside.
when
I
we
go to
have
Parkside all the time.
oh, I missed the Parkside. The Parkside, Tony
Yeah.
was
Tony.
yeah, he was best friends with my cousin Lou
Oh, okay.
when they were growing up. And you know do you know Leonard's Bakery? I don't know if you know, it's been
No.
gone a long time. They were the Mangiapanis. They lived on the same. Everybody lived on the same block. But the Lemon Ice King was, we used to get the big 5-gallon thing when we have the party
Right.
at my grandmother's. And for a while during when the World's Fair was on, until about, I guess, the early 80s, my aunt and uncle had a luncheonette on 108th Street. And I worked there for a couple of years. And yeah, I still remember those days when the vegetable guy would come around, and the knife sharpening guy would come around. They all had their own trucks and all of that kind of stuff. But we grew up we were in Corona. I was born in Whitestone, and then eventually we moved to College Point, and that's kind
My
of
husband, Sid Davidoff, was a Queens guy. He's always born and raised in Queens. And he set my daughter and I up, but good at the Lemon Ice King. Because the first time we went, he said, tell them you want a mix of lemon and something else. So we said, okay, we'll have the lemon and they went berserkers. No mixing. There's no such thing as mixing. And he's laughing. No mixing.
That's so funny. Yes, I know. Yeah, as soon as you said that, as soon as you said setup, I said, "Uh-oh, they asked to mix."
But then my daughter, one of the kids who worked there fell in love with her because we used to go all the time, and he gave her the coveted, real Lemon Ice King of Corona staff shirt.
Oh,
Not the one you buy, but the staff T-shirt.
Oh, that's nice. I'll tell you about Tough Tony's. With when I was first dating my wife, I had this neat little MGB.
Oh, I
convertible.
have an Austin Healey 3000 with right-hand drive.
Yeah. So we go to the park side, and I park by Spaghetti Park across the street there. There was, they had the 4-space parking lot or something.
Right.
So I park across the street. I leave the top down. It was summertime, and we're getting out, and my wife says to me, "You're going to leave the car like that? Aren't you going to put the top up and set the alarm and everything?" I said,
Wow.
"No, not
Safest place
here.
on earth.
Not here." So she says, "Well, how do you know?" And I said, "Watch." So as we're walking in the door, the guy's standing out front, and I said, "Is that MGB safe over there? Ain't nobody going to touch that car."
Yeah, right.
She goes, "How did you know that?" I said, "Trust me, nobody's
You
touching
remember
that
they
car."
used to have on the other side of the street from Parkside, they had that little coffee place that never had coffee. I don't know what went on in there. We tried 100 times to get a cup of coffee. We don't have any coffee. But it's a coffee, but we don't have coffee. Okay, then.
Well, I'll tell you one last Corona story before we go. And that was, I've told this a couple of times on these interviews, but my Aunt Mary and my Uncle Frank both worked at Leonard's Bakery. And I just found this out recently. The owner, Leonard Mangiapane, was cousins with Profaci.
Oh,
So my aunt's behind the counter. This is probably late 50s, maybe early 60s or something like that. And Profaci walks in with his 2 sons, and he's wearing a white fedora. And as he goes past, my Aunt Mary says, "There goes Charlie Chan and his 2 sons." And they go past. And he gives a look, and the boys kind of chuckle. They're in the back doing whatever business they're doing, olive oil business, I guess. And as they come out, he says to my aunt in Sicilian, "You're a real wise one." And she said the 2 sons were hysterical, right? And they leave. So her boss comes running out, and he's going, "Mary, what are you doing? Don't you know who that is?" She goes, "Yeah, Profaci, the olive oil man." And he's like, he's the olive oil man, but he's not the olive oil. But Leonard's they were a great bakery, but I think they had a side business too at the time.
I'm the only Italian on earth that doesn't like Italian pastry.
How could that be?
I don't know. It skipped a generation. My grandsons make me take them to Little Italy for the cannoli king. We go to the cannoli king, and they just stuff their faces with it. I don't like Italian pastry. Never have.
Well, this has been delightful and fascinating.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this. This has really, really been a lot of fun.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun for me too.